Hello, in this video we're going to be looking at how we create soil sample points. As a point, we have to make sure that we have a field boundary to create these soil sample points in our field. We're going to look at how we create sample points from a grid and then individual sample points, and then we'll finish up by looking at how we export those points to a monitor. Rightio, so I'm now wanting to create some soil sample points on Spinny Field here. We've got our background imagery and we've got some yield data. You can choose whatever yield data you like. It can be a contoured map or it can be a spatial data map. It doesn't really matter as long as we've got something in the background to help us guide us to create our points if we're not using a grid sample, or even if we are using a grid sample, there may be some specialist areas that we want to take a sample from. So the first thing that I'm going to do is use the transparency slider to reduce the visibility of the yield data layer. So if I'm wanting to guide myself in to put some points there, I can still see the map on the top. Or I can still see the map behind the boundary layer. Now in my displayed layers box, I'll highlight boundary layer and then use the layers tool to move the boundary layer to the top, because this is the layer that I'm going to use to create my soil sample points. Moving the cursor onto the boundary layer, I'm going to right mouse click and then select Make Sampling Grid, and as we can see in the background, the boundary layer has changed colour to a very small gridded colour. And we choose Create Sampling Grid, and we're going to choose points. That's what we want to create here, and we can use whichever grids we like, and everything else remains as a default. So we select OK, and we notice that our cursor has changed to a grid. Well, we're going to move our cursor over the whole of the field, left mouse click and drag it across the whole of the field. I get to the end, I release the left mouse click, and then I click once more to activate the creation of the points. Here I can now see 4 points in the field. I will select the zoom all, so I can now see the whole of my field, and I can now start working on the points to either move them if I want to, or rename them, or add some more. So what I'm going to do now is select Edit Layer, and I'm going to go to a point and highlight it, and if I hold my left mouse key down, it changes shape from the cursor to a hand shape, and once it's changed to a hand shape, we can move the point. So here we can move all of these if we want to, and move them around from there. And obviously this one in the right against the hedge line is not somewhere that we'd really want to take a sample from. So yeah, it's only a very small field, that's why we've only got 4 points as part of this process. If I want to add another point, I can select the Define Points box and select that, and then use my left mouse click to select on a point that I want to create. I tick Sample ID, and this is going to be grid sample or sample number 5. And we now have another sample point created. We have now we have the sample created. I'm going to click Save and Close, and see now the red one has gone to point 5. We want to move it, and I'm holding my left mouse click down, but I can't move it. It doesn't change to a hand shape until I click the Edit Layers button. I hold the mouse key, left mouse key down, and move it, and we can move the point. We click Save and Close, and away we go. Now we can check the order of our samples, so we've got 1, 2, and then we come back down here to 3. Ideally, if we're wanting to follow a pattern, we might want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what we need to do is just rearrange those to rearrange the points to we need to rearrange the points. So Right, we are now wanting to create some soil sample points, and we have our 3 layers here. We've got our background imagery just to give us a guide around the field if we need some help in choosing where we're going to put our points. We've got our boundary layer, which will always stay there, and this is what we use to create our soil sample points from. And then we have our yield data. Now we can use any view of our yield data. We can use the spatial data, or we can use contour data. It really doesn't matter. The one thing that we do want to do though is look at making it transparent. So using the transparency slider along the bottom, we're just going to make it that little bit more transparent so we can still see the image and the yield data in the background, but it isn't so strong that when we put our soil sample points there, they get lost in amongst the yield data information and the view. So we've now made the yield data a little bit more transparent. The next thing that we have to do is move our boundary layer to the top, so it's the active layer and the one that we're working from. So we've selected boundary layer and used the layers tool to move it up to the top, so we can see that the boundary layer is now our top active layer. Moving the cursor to the field, we right mouse click and then select Make Sampling Grid. And here we get the sampling grid options. We're going unchecked planned, and we want to leave points ticked. As to the grid size, that is entirely your choice. That really depends on the size of the field that you've got and the variation that you've got and where you want to put your points. So this is a small field here. We're just going to leave it in 100 meter grids. The rest of it we'll leave the same. So we click OK, and we see that our cursor here has changed and it now has a grid icon next to our arrow. We're going to move the arrow and the pointer outside our field boundary, left mouse click, and we see some crosshairs that are created at the mouse point. We're going to hold our left mouse key down and drag it over the whole of the field. And then once we get to the other side, we're going to let go, and then we're going to just click off the grid, and so we have now created 5 grid points in our field. If we click the Zoom All button here, we will view the whole field, which will make it a little bit easier to see where our soil sample points are. Now the first thing that we notice is that we've got a couple of points right on our boundary, which is probably not ideal for soil sampling, so we want to set about moving those points. To do that, we select our Edit Layer button, and then we will move our cursor to our first point that we want to move. Using the left mouse button, we will hold it over a point until it changes to a hand shape. We can then move the sample point to wherever we want it to go, and then we release our mouse key to make the point active again. So we'll do it again with the yellow point here. I've highlighted, I'm hovering over the yellow point, I've left mouse clicked, hold it down for a couple of seconds, it changes to a hand shape, then I move it to the new point where I want to take a sample from. So we've now got our 5 soil sample points, and if we're happy with those, then we'll click Save and Close, and then we'll look at exporting them out to a device. However, if we want to add another soil sample point in for any particular reason, then we can do that as well. To start the process, we click Edit Layer again, and this time we move to the Define Points button. Select the Define Points and then move our cursor to where we want to create a point, and we select that area, and then the Object Properties comes up. We tick the box next to Sample ID, and we're going to make this point number 6. Then we click OK. It hasn't actually changed colour yet to give us another one, so we click Save, and then we see that it changes to pink and adds our 6th soil sampling point to our map. So these are the points now that we want to export out to our mobile device to go and take the samples in the field. The one thing that we may want to check is the order in which the points appear. So I've got my point 1, my point 2, and then it comes down to point 3 here. If we want to make them point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5, it'll make it easier for sampling and driving around our field. So I'm going to click Save and Close to save the editing that we've just done, and then click Edit Layer again and go to our point and hover my mouse key over that point and select it. Now it's changed shape and colour. We're going to right mouse click and go Properties, and I'm going to rename that sample ID sample point 3. So it changes to green. We've got 2 greens. That doesn't matter at the moment. By the time we've finished, we'll be okay. So we've got now point 1, point 2, point 3. The yellow is point 4. What we want to do is make this one, the pink one, point 5. So we highlight it, right mouse click and go Properties, and make this one point 5. Come down to our final green one, highlight it, right mouse click, Properties, and then make them 0.6 and click OK. Now the final thing that we may want to do is actually put the number on the map so it makes it easier for us. So I'm going to save this, and then using the select tool, I'm going to left mouse click and drag my cursor over all of the points so they all change colour. I'm going to right mouse click on one and then select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is how we would generally export them out to a mobile device as well. If we want to add the latitude and longitude points and the coordinates, we would just tick coordinates and then click OK, and it will show them there. If we want to remove them, we go back up to the display layers box and tick that, select that, untick coordinates, and then tick OK, and we're just then left with our point numbers left. And this is probably what we would do to export it out to a device. Speaking of exporting it out to a device, the way that we go about doing that is going into our going into our management tree and finding our grid sample job and task in the management tree. We will right mouse click it and select export, and then we have a choice of file types that we want to export it out to. If you want to send it to Google Earth, you can do. Probably the most common is the ArcView shapefile, and then we will just put in spinny field. Right, because I've already got spinny field in there, so I will select a spinny field, overwrite it. If you haven't got it in there, you will just type in the name against the file name. So we'll click yes. We've got our output file there. Don't do as I did and start typing it into the output file. As you can see, it doesn't work. So we click browse and enter the information in from there. So we'll click OK, and now our file has been exported. And so that is how we create soil sampling points and export them out as a shapefile.